Okay, so Futura is in there. We're going to hit back. So now we go to model type. So it's definitely selected as a plane, so that's good. And then aircraft type. So is it one servo? So now this, even though it has flaps and it has two servos in each wing, it really comes down to how is it set up. Because if it's Y harnessed, you need to select it just as one servo. So in the wing, and this is Y harnessed, it does not have dual ailerons. The receiver, all it knows is it has one aileron and one flap because everything's Y harnessed out of the little box on the inside. So that stays as one aileron, one flap. That enables your flap function. So when you go down here to tail, the tail is going to be normal with, even though it has two servos back there, again, they're split off a Y harness and one rudder. So the tail is normal. So we want to select that as normal. We hit next. I don't have a gyro in this thing at all. I don't use gyros in anything. Probably the only thing that I would think about that is the AL. So from here now, we are going to just simply go back to there. So we have a Futura. We have this thing set up for 5 minutes. I can already tell you the timer on this thing I want differently. So we're going to go down to timer. I set my timer up to count down. On this plane, I want a 4-minute timer on a throttle stick, 25%, and I set mine up for 1 time active. So as soon as I hit the throttle, timer started. So we're going to go down to next there. Every minute, I want my radio to talk to me and tell me. With 1 minute left, I want the radio to talk to me. 30 seconds left, I want it to talk to me. 20 seconds left, I want the thing to talk to me. And then expiration, I want a voice and a vibrate. So, and then every minute afterwards, I want a voice. So then we go to next, start, stop, reset. No, I don't need to worry about any of that. So we hit back, and now we have a 4-minute timer. So from here, I have a basic setup that now I can do my setup. And what I do with my receivers is before I plug them in, I always like to bind them. So on this radio, on the Spectrum, we just simply shut it off. I use an iCAD pack, make sure that I have positive, positive, negative to negative. If you have a bind button on a Spectrum, you're simply going to hold that button in. That puts it in bind mode, and you're going to power it up and it should blinking. Now I'm using a satellite receiver as well, so you should notice that the satellite receiver is also blinking. So I am going to set this here. The radio should be roughly like 3 feet away. So I hold in the bind button. It's already set for Futura. So I'm going to come back here. Again, the signals come out of this thing. It's almost like a donut. So remember, they come out the side, or almost like an apple, if you will. So we're going to hold in our bind button. I'm going to turn it on, but I'm going to be back over here.
Binding. DSMX 22 milliseconds. Telemetry. Bind complete.
Cool. First shot, right? So now I let go of the bind button, and now this thing is bound to my receiver. So at this point, we can go ahead and disconnect. I can take this thing out, and now I can start figuring out what wiring goes where on the inside. So let's take a look and make sure you guys can see in there. That way. Hopefully you can see. Tilt you down on the inside. So we have this set of wires nest in here. They did a nice job with marking these things. So first things first, in the owner's book, and they give you a nice setup as which one's which one. So channel 3 is going to be your throttle, so forth and so on. On the receiver, hopefully everything is marked out for me there, so I can more or less just match these up. So we are going to use channel 2, and they tell me in here that channel 2 is the elevator, which seems to hold out. So again, we want to make sure signals all the way in here on the inside. So the elevator is going to be this one, and signal is going to be my orange wire. So we want to make sure that we push that thing into there, and we have elevator. So the next one is channel 4, and the book tells me that channel 4 is my rudder, and on here the rudder is right below it. So again, keeping all the signal on the same side. Okay, and that's there. And I always make sure these things are good and seated on the inside. Now we have flaps, and flaps are listed as auxiliary 1. So that thing comes all the way down into there. We have gear. So gear is right in between them. So we're going to fish that thing in between. Channel 1 is going to be ailerons. So again, kind of running out of visibility room. Got my big bear paws in the way. So we're going to make sure we keep everything lined up. That thing goes in there. And then finally, we should have throttle, which is going to be this one, which is going to be right above it. All right, so everything on there should be plugged in, okay? So right now, this is just a soft placement. But what I do is I have all these connectors in here, and before I secure those in there, I always make sure everything is right. All right, so for now, I'm going to power this up. I got a Zippy 4500. This comes right from Hobby King. So the radio is turned on, this thing is off. So why don't we go through, just while we're here, ESC calibration really quick. So yeah, you know what, before I do that, let's make sure we get our gear and stuff down, so that way it doesn't come down accidentally. So we're going to place the battery in here. I am simply going to go ahead and plug this thing in, and then I'm going to lift it up so that way if my gear is set up or anything, that it doesn't wind up jarring it. All right, so gear is down, so we can put that thing down there. And let's just give a check of our control surfaces and radio. So elevators, that's right, right. So here, so we have ailerons that are backwards, all right, and our rudder is left, and right is right. So the only thing we have to reverse is ailerons. To do that, we're going to come into this menu. We're going to go to servo setup, and we're going to go to travel. We're going to click that and turn it over to reverse. I'm going to go to aileron, click it. I'm just going to hit back here. Now we have right is up, left is down. Okay, so that thing is set up there. So at this point, I think what I want to do is I want to set up my flaps. So forgive me if we don't get it on the first shot here, but we're going to go to flap system. And because of the way I set the system up, this thing should work easily. So flaps, we're going to go in there, set to inhibit. So the aileron stick, the nice thing about Spectrum, as soon as I want flaps, I just have to select the switch I want by operating it, and it knows. So D is that switch. So in position 0 is which I have it right now. There's no mix set up right there. And I'm just going to pan this down a little bit so it's easier to see. So in position 1, I want to set my flaps. And they're coming back up right now. It's going to be a negative, probably 100. And all I'm doing is watching my flaps right now to see that they come up and they're level and neutral. So they're not quite all the way up yet. Okay, so that's probably going to be servo adjustments there. So I'm not going to play around with that too much. But I don't want this on position 1 to be 0. For now, just rough number. I'm going to set this, we're going to go negative. To 50. And then I'm going to come down here, and that should be 0. So ultimately, when you look at position of the flaps, they should be all the way up. There should be there, and then that should be landing. So we have no flaps, take off flaps, landing flaps. Now, as far as this thing goes, the other thing that I do that's nice with Spectrum stuff is I come down to the bottom to speed, and I usually set that to 2.5 to 3 seconds. So we're going to do that with 3 right now. So let me show you what that does. So when I go up here to my flaps, it's a slow apply, all right? So it's not hard on the plane or the flaps all at once. You can see how that slows it down. It's almost a nice scale look, but it's a sport plane. So what are you going to do? All right, so let's talk about ESC calibration and how we do that. So our gear is set. I think our gear works right. Sorry, try not to jar you around too much. So how do we set up an ESC? How do we do that? So we know that all of our control surfaces are the way we want them to be right now. The receiver we're going to glue in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect the battery. So that thing's off right now. We are going to set the trim on the radio all the way down, because otherwise that keeps the motor powered up slightly. All right, so battery's unplugged, radio's on, we go full throttle, and then we're going to take the battery and we are going to plug it in. 2 beeps all the way down, 6 beeps to verify that you're out of programming mode, and now it knows throttle range from top to bottom. And if we hold this, all right, we're good. So that takes care of that. So now that we know that everything is set up right, radio-wise in here for now, let's go ahead and just unplug this battery. Let's get this thing out of the way. Shut off our radio for now. And I want you to be able to see this receiver. So anyway, on the sides, people often ask like, hey, what do you do to keep your plugs from coming out? I trust nothing, right? So if there's a failure point, it's going to happen. So what I do is I take a hot glue gun here, and hopefully you can see this, and literally just run a bead right along the edge. It's a small bead. It's not a ton of glue. It's not ooby-gooby in there. And I just get a little bit along that edge. And that stuff will peel right off if you want it to, but it absolutely prevents plugs from coming loose. I've never had a receiver plug back out. And I don't know, maybe you've never had one back out either anyway. So from there, I look at receiver position. Where do I want this thing to be? So this plug is going to come underneath for now. And obviously the battery is going to be fitting here in this foam compartment. So I don't want this thing next to the battery or with it. So I think that what I'm going to do with this thing is I'm going to position my antennas crossways, because you want them opposite directions. So if this one goes this way, this one goes this way, I'm probably going to have one going that way, and I'm going to tuck one back underneath. So I think I'm going to position this whole receiver assembly, though, I think back up in here. So it's kind of up and out of the way, and then I'll worry about antenna position thereafter. So easiest way to install a receiver in a foam plane is to simply take this thing and let's get some ooby-gooby in the back of this. Now, I try not to go too crazy with it, but just enough on there so I know it's not going to come loose. I'm going to get this thing up in there. Just stick it fast. And now for the satellite receiver, I'm going to have to tuck a little bit of that wiring in there. But what I'm going to do with the satellite receiver, and the satellite is just simply a redundant signal. Just because there's a lot of parts for the cost of a satellite receiver, it's not a big issue. So this thing I want to have up. That is going to be my upside on the satellite receiver. And I am literally going to position that thing as far up in front of the nose, away from all the other garbage signals as possible. So we're going to fold that thing hopefully out of the way. All right, fine. Be like that. Do you know you're on camera, pal? So anyway, we're going to just ooby-gooby on the back of this thing a little bit. A little bit of hot glue there. And we're going to take this thing up front. I'm just going to tack it fast in the nose. So the rest of the wiring, I usually clean up all the wiring when I'm done. Make things nice and tidy. If you really want to keep the wiring nice and neat in there, all I simply do, even if I went on this side, is I'm going to do it here on the other side. But I just run a little bit of hot glue, and then I just press that connector into the corner of the foam. So the battery I'm leaving here right now just so it keeps weight on it, but put a little bit of hot glue in there, just let it tack fast. Hot glue is a wonderful thing in foam planes. Stuff really, really works well. Set this thing back up here. Let me bring this around the other side. Bear with me, I'm sorry for shaking you. I don't know if you can see that any better. So what I will do with this wiring here, I'm just going to run this stuff down the side. So literally I just put a drop of hot glue in there. And I just tack that, like so. I try to make it look tidy. Some guys are really, really good at this, but I just try not to do overkill, but I want the stuff to look good. Again, the neater and tidier it is, then the less likely you are to have failures. Alright, so hopefully you guys can see what that looks like in there. So nice little tidy edge of the wiring, and then like I said, that stuff on the inside we'll clean up and get out of the way. So receiver is fast where I want it, battery is in there. So Sharpie is going to be my good friend here. Let me take this hot glue gun, that's unplugged for now. So when it comes down to balancing, what are we going to do for balancing? So we will come over here, like this, and let's go ahead and